Of Cuba Coast to Coast series takes us now to the province of Artemisa, one of the newer provinces created that used to be a part of the city of Havana.
And it's right there where Hatzel Vela and his crew find the town of Mariel, the site of the famous Mariel Exodus 35 years ago. Tonight, Cubans from both sides of the Florida Straits share their stories of that pivotal moment in history.
Shipping containers is what you see coming into Mariel. The terminal is Cuba's newest economic attraction. They say it will rival any port in America. Its bay is now a playground for school children taking advantage of their summer vacation. The offloading cranes and containers serve as background to life in a small town that's inextricably intertwined with history in South Florida. Off in the distance, you see a brand new port here off the coast of Mariel, but it was in these very same waters 35 years ago. Thousands of Cubans took off. In 1980, Local 10 documented the migrant crisis. Fidel Castro, then in charge, allowed Cubans to leave. By the time it was all over, some 125,000 Cubans came to America on mostly chartered boats.
Yo reclamé a 80 de familia.
Roberto Damas is a Cuban exile who decided to rent a boat with hopes he could bring back 80 relatives. Damas, once a political prisoner in Cuba who fled with his family on the Freedom flights in 1970, found himself going back to Cuba.
El barco de nosotros era grande, que se llamaba el Huracán. No sé si existe o no existe.
He and several friends split the $45,000 cost to rent a 65-foot boat.
Salimos de Cayo Hueso.
They left Key West and eventually made it to Mariel.
Tuve 11 días allá.
11 días.
11 días pasando hambre y durmiendo en el piso del barco.
11 days waiting with little to eat and sleeping on the floor of the boat.
Eso fue una tortura.
¿Por qué?
Porque nadie sabe lo que es eso.
A torturous experience, he says. Remembers having to pay off Cuban officers so he could get his family members on board.
Trajimos 156.
They brought back 156 migrants, but only 3 were family members.
Mi hermano, la señora y mi sobrina.
He brought back his brother, his brother's wife, and their daughter. The rest were strangers. A small percentage, we later learned, had just been released from prisons. Some mentally ill, others Castro wanted out. Back on our journey in Mariel, where Nancy Limas Diaz remembers families sobbing as relatives left. She recalls seeing hundreds of boats.
La gente, que se le fue la familia.
Felicia Vasquez Hernandez says it was tough to see folks watch as families left because we knew, says the 80-year-old, they were not coming back. There was also the fear they may lose their lives at sea. You know how treacherous the sea can be, she says. The Florida Straits, unfortunately, is something Cubans know too well. For Damas, it's the only time he has returned to his native land. He never plans to go back. There are thousands of stories of family separation and those who have refused, like Mr. Damas, to ever go back until there is complete political change on the communist island. Here at home, we continue to see an influx of Cuban migrants arriving in South Florida. Just this past weekend, a group of 15 Cubans arrived on a sailboat on Key Biscayne. As you may know, the Coast Guard has intercepted and sent back more than 4,500 Cubans just this year. Kind of gives you a scope of what's happening. And the fear I hear is that the Cuban Adjustment Act may end, and that's why the numbers are high.
We have seen that. You know, back to the port, Cuba says it rivals any port here in the U.S. You couldn't get inside, but you saw a sense of how big it is, and it's being built. Tell us who's paying for this and how big is it?
Yeah, word is that the Brazilians have been paying for this, millions of dollars, if not, as you mentioned, billions. And we understand that they estimate that they'll be able to process about 1 million containers a year. You compare that to the Port of Miami, they say they can process 2 million, so just half the size, but probably will be competitive.
Okay, where are you going to take us next, Hansel?
All right, so we leave Artemisa, we go to Matanzas, the southern side of Cuba, and just as important because there's where we find the Bay of Pigs, as you can see it there, a very controversial area because we know the conflict happened there. And what makes the story special is that we talked to a veteran who was there during those days, recalls what it was like, and tells us that ordeal of being out there fighting for freedom for his country.
Wow.
Oh, just like Mr. Damas, it's going to be such a history lesson.
Amazing.
Okay, good. Thank you, Hansel.
Thank you.
And Local 10's journey of Cuba coast to coast continues online on local10.com. We have a page dedicated to each province with extra footage and slideshows. And under Artemisa here, you can find an interactive guide chronicling the Mariel boat lift and find old reports from Local 10 of the exodus back in the 1980s. That's all on local10.com under our historic access section on the front page of our webpage.